I think the competitiveness is really interesting because, again, I had that in undergrad and postgrad, a really core group of us who all saw eye to eye and how we did it. And I think that's the really important thing about what we do and how you learn in studios, is that you kind of push each other on, but actually it's a very positive thing. It's not a negative thing.
And I'm not the kind of person to say, oh no, there's no selfish reasons for me to put that online and try to get likes and things, because of course there is. The doors that have opened from this, and I'm sure for you as well, we have to be honest about that, I think.
I never used to be a coffee drinker, and then third year of undergraduate I started having it just because I just decided that was what I was doing. And it was like my treat a day that I would go and have a 10 o'clock coffee.
Hold on a second. We just shared drawings on Instagram, and now, as you said, you're exhibiting your work next to some of the leading architects in the world. Like, what's going on there? And then it makes you think, well, wait a minute. The Instagram is not just Instagram, and that's why I wanted to talk about it in a slightly different sense. That it's that, in some ways, I see it as a metaphor for how architectural education needs to evolve. What strikes me actually is how much we have in common. First of all, you spent some time in Dubai. I understand you were born in Dubai. I lived in Dubai for 5 years, which is crazy. You are obviously doing this subject called architecture, which I do too. And I think we both took a very strange route in kind of sharing our architectural journeys, sharing our drawings, sharing our curiosities, I think, on social media, and there being quite a, I guess, considerable response to that. So we're going to talk about all of these things. And I guess, first of all, I like to start with where things kind of started, kind of separate from architecture, just thinking like, what was your life like? Because you were born in Dubai, right?
Yeah, no, it was quite strange. It's one of those things where it's a kind of, I haven't quite reconciled with the moving around to the point where I now feel settled. I think I am now more settled in London than I've felt anywhere in a long time. I've always been wanting to continue to move. And I think that's partly because we were doing a lot of moving when I was younger, because I was born in Dubai where my parents were working at the time. And then from there, we moved to Bahrain, realized that wasn't, there was even less in Bahrain at the time than there was in Dubai. Because I was born there in 95. So the tallest building was like 12 stories. So, you could see the sky, whereas now you go back there, you can't. And we went to Bahrain, and Bahrain was even further behind at that point. And so it was kind of a strange thing of why did we make that move? And for various other reasons, we then moved from there to Ireland, which is where I kind of started picking up language. And sometimes there's a bit of a misconception that I am Irish, but I assure you I'm not. And then my brother. Wait.
I gotta say, this is very impressive, but the speed, this speed is not good for this podcast.
Okay.
No, I mean, let's just go back to Dubai, because by the way, it's good because you've probably done interviews before and you need to be fast, but this is a chilled, safe space. Talk about whatever you want. You're not going to get cancelled. Hopefully not. Yeah. Let's just talk about, so Dubai, how the hell did your parents end up in Dubai?
So at the time, my parents were working in hotels. So they actually my dad was working in the UK at the time and was offered an opportunity to go out there and become the general manager of a hotel there. And so basically upped and left.
What hotel was that?
Well, basically it was the Four Seasons, what was originally the Four Seasons. And then it was the Burj Al Arab. He kind of was slightly involved in that, which was kind of interesting as it went. And then from there, he basically...
Just for people who don't know that as well, that's like the 7-star sailboat hotel that everyone knows of.
Yeah, that's the one. And then from there, basically, for various reasons, we moved to Bahrain. And I think we were only there for about a year or so, and then moved on. And we actually ended up back in Ireland because my mum's side of the family, while they're Maltese, they're actually They based in Ireland, so we ended up kind of moving back that way to where some of our relatives were, and ended up, my parents ended up working there. And then from there, my brother was born, and then we moved back to Scotland, where my dad's originally from. So it was kind of a funny moving around. We ended up kind of settling in central Scotland, so we were kind of almost equidistant between families, which kind of worked to a degree. So we'd kind of take the ferry to go down to Ireland, and then we'd go up to Aberdeen, where my dad's side of the family were.
So it was quite quick succession moving then, was it?
So yeah, I was in Dubai for about 4 or 5 years, then straight to Bahrain for a year, then to Ireland. We were there for about 5 or 6 years, and then to Scotland.
So do you have any memories of Dubai? Because I remember thinking, obviously you're born in Dubai. I spent 5 years in Dubai in my kind of mid-teens. So that's going to be a very different life. And as you rightly said, Dubai developed like freaking, like a Concorde. It was just insane. In probably our lifetime, Dubai has gone from being, plain land, almost desert, to urban metropolis. So
yeah.
Do you have any memories of Dubai at that time?
Well, I mean, that's the funny thing. Very, very vague ones from because I was just so young. And the only memories I have since is, when I've gone back to visit friends who I managed to keep in touch with through family and things like that. But I mean, gosh, the last time I was there, probably 6+ years ago now. And it's quite interesting because at that point, I just started architecture, or I was like a little bit into it. And I'd already kind of, as you know, architecture kind of changes the way you see everything. And I went back and I don't recognize this place. I don't recognize it from my vague memories of what it was when I was young, but I don't even recognize it as anywhere, because it is so copied from everything, trying to be everything else. And they've kind of got this ideology that they need to look like the West, when actually really is at the detriment to the erasure of their actual culture. So it was very strange being there, because it actually felt more like being in the UK than the UK. It's like this weird pastiche.
I can't believe you said that.
Stuff.
Because that's literally when people ask me what it was like to live in Dubai, that's word for word what I say.
Yeah.
Because when I went there, it was like I only met people from London, and everyone in London is a Londoner. But then when you go to Dubai, I'm suddenly in school with people from Newcastle and Edinburgh and Leeds, and I'm like, I never knew about these regions or the people in these regions, even when I lived in the UK.
Yeah.
So I suppose identity is going to be you're going to have a very interesting view on your own identity, I imagine, because it's probably made up of so many different fragments. And where do you see yourself from?
Well, I mean, that's the thing I always come back to, because I think as soon as I speak, people are kind of questioning that. And so I come across it fairly regularly, especially, being I say I'm Scottish, a Scotsman, whatever, Scotsman in London. They go, hang on a minute, sorry, slow down, what are you saying? And so there are things in the accent where I picked up bits from central Scotland where they speak quite quickly. Each part of Scotland has its own different dialects that all grow from a variety of different things. And, the Glaswegians speak a very particular type of Scots in comparison to, say, people from Aberdeen. The Aberdonians, they speak a form of Doric, which has slowly evolved from, Celtic language, etc. So it's an interesting mix of stuff. So when anyone ever asks me where I'm from, I always go, well, I don't really know. But having been in London now for about 5 years, which is slightly scary thinking about it, I would say I'm Scottish, because that is, I suppose, where I've been the longest. My short line that I always give is I'm half Scottish, half Maltese, born in Dubai, and I just move on. And actually, I think there's kind of a process at some point where, give it some time, I will actually go back and kind of really revisit that a little bit. And I think, all sorts of crazy things have come out of the pandemic, and obviously a lot of them have been horrific. But I think a positive for me was having a bit of time to actually sit down and take a breather and reflect, and not need to be places and not need to be doing stuff, and actually just sit and think about where I situate myself and what I'm about. And where I'm from, and kind of reckon with these questions. I don't have a better answer, but it was nice to take that time.
Again, I can relate, and it's a strange one for me to see someone of let's just say, not of South Asian color or Arab color or whatever, who also struggles with figuring out what the hell their identity is. Because I think we often think, at least people like me, and I think a lot of people whose parents were immigrants into this country, who think that, oh, we have a complicated past, but we live in such a, I guess, globalized, cosmopolitan world right now that actually identity has become a difficult concept for everyone. And one thing that's really interesting is when there's like this thing we know among, I'll just say it because I said, it's a safe space, bit of banter among brown people, is we get asked by more, we get asked by, when brown people ask another brown person, where are you from? They're actually asking, where is your brownness from? Because you can't say, oh, I'm from London or I'm from England. They'll be like, no, where are you really from?
Yeah.
So do you have some parallels with that? Like,
I mean, yes, I would say so. I mean, not obviously in comparison to that, but my thing is, I've never really fitted anywhere because I'm not Scottish enough to be Scottish. My accent is there, but it's quite light in comparison to most people. Like most of my friends from high school, or the Scots that I was studying with in undergrad in Scotland, again, they all had proper Scots accents. So it would always be a thing of, I'd be like, oh, I'm Scottish, and they'd be like, are you? And then I come down to England, and then I'm also overtly Scottish, or they mix me up with other different accents, and you're sitting there going, how do I situate myself within this to kind of just keep everyone happy? Or, I mean, there's kind of, I don't know, I think I've definitely moved away from trying to portray the idea of what they want me to be, and kind of just doing my own thing and just being like, look, my accent is strange. I'm a bit of a mixed bag. Deal with that as you will. And actually, I've got to kind of, get on with my own thing. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And I don't know, I used to look at it as in quite a negative way, because I think there is that thing, very kind of entrenched kind of stigma against outsiders, regardless of where you are in the UK. And I think I definitely experienced that, even though to all intents and purposes, I have actually been very fortunate in the position that I've been in throughout all of this. But actually it's one of those funny things where I think it's fair. The line is very fine, but it's very clear when you realize that line is there, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, it's hard to not make so many conversations about identity. And, I've just done a previous episode, and inevitably we went deep down into the pits of identity discussions. But I think it's just so relevant right now. We're living in a society where there's more and more intermingling of completely different cultures and races, and diversity is just, it's causing the conversations to happen for a reason, I think. But I like the idea to also think about, come away from the London centric bubble and come away. And I think that's why I hope to kind of, I like the fact that you've got that perspective as well, of someone who's lived in different places. Because when I lived in Dubai, the idea that you're defined by where you come from, or you're defined by your ethnicity, is so commonplace there. And it's almost like, I wouldn't put it down to any type of, I mean, maybe it is. Maybe, of course, there probably is a level of classism in Dubai for sure. Locals from Emirati background obviously sit on a much higher pedestal than everyone else for various, I could equate that to so many, I could bring in so many factors in which they have advantages over, let's say, expats. But I think there's also like this hidden rule, or this hidden layer of like, if you come to this country, as you said, it's a land of, it doesn't really belong to anywhere. It's almost anyone and everyone can make it their own. That when you get there, the first thing people want to know, so that they can put you in this box, or so that they can figure out where they have familiarities with you, or where they want to maybe connect with you, is, where are you from? What's your background?
Yeah.
So I don't know, part of me thinks that we need to kind of step out of the UK centric way of looking at identity and think about actually on a broader level. There is in some ways a reason people look to other people's identities and their backgrounds as a way to just place them first.
Mm.
Do you think that's wrong, or do you think there's almost a level of it's inevitable?
I don't know. I think
as somebody who's been all around the world as well, you know, like, because this is my opinion, and sometimes I'm going to be honest with you, like, this is a safe space to talk. Like, I struggle to understand a lot of the grouping that goes on with identity, and people saying we're from this place, we're from that place, because I feel I've been to a place like Dubai, so everything in me is like disintegrated. I don't feel like I'm from one place.
Yeah, because it is just it's such a layering of different kind of cultural bubbles, and different kind of levels of bubbles, and it's interesting. I don't know if it's a question of right and wrong. I think that's always slightly tricky, because usually if we're saying it's wrong, it's partly because it's come from a long line of a particular way of thinking, and not saying that's necessarily right either. But sadly, regardless of how conscious you are of your biases, you have biases that are like baked in from the get-go, depending on where you're in. I think I do though, however, have a problem with just people categorizing and needing that kind of strapline in order to be able to understand anything about you. And I think, actually, to be honest, the way that I look at it is, if someone's asking you where you're from, in order to kind of get a key into what you're about, it's because they're not willing to make any more of an effort to think about it beyond that. And so I kind of actually shy away from that, tend to not answer, and then actually ask them something that I want to know instead. So I think it is a tricky thing, because yes, while it's kind of, I don't know, it's a subconscious conscious thing, people are now obviously checking themselves on it, and that is good. And I think finally, I'm quite optimistic things are starting to change in that side of things. But it is still very much the default, and that's, I think, the issue, is that people default to that way of thinking without going, what is it beyond that I find interesting with this person?
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that, but part of me also thinks the fact that, it's a very, I mean, having lived in Dubai, it's also a very quick way to find similarities with someone. And although, yes, you're not defined by where you come from, obviously, in our scenarios, by figuring out, oh, this guy had some time in Dubai, so he knows about certain cultures, and therefore we can talk about those things. And there's going to be a level of, there's going to be a level of connection on those points. I think that's important to some degree. And I feel like the question, because we hate the question, don't we? Where are you from? I feel like that question is changing, and people are as society becomes more and more diverse and open to diversity, they're realizing that maybe the question of like, what is your background, is a better question than where are you from? Because where are you from says, what box are you in?
No, exactly.
But anyway, I didn't want to make this entire conversation about identity, but it's fascinating for us to talk about that, for sure.
No, I mean, it is, and it's interesting as well, because the thing I come across a lot is also how you're perceived outwardly from various different forms of media and things as well, how you perceive other, people in the profession, etc. It's really interesting, because again, we originally knew of each other very much virtually, and have got to know each other over time by various different things. And it's interesting, that image that you build from the way that you're portrayed in other kind of mediums as well.
So on that topic, we met virtually, didn't we? I suppose, I mean, how do you perceive we met? Because I want to know what you think.
That's a good question. I was actually trying to pinpoint down when that actually happened. I think it kind of happened quite naturally from what I remember. And it was just, I feel like it was a response to your work, but I actually honestly can't remember. I think it's one of those funny things where more and more that these sort of meetings happen, and I've met quite a lot of now quite close friends via social media or whatever it is. And I think because partly the fluidity of it and the ease of it, you kind of, those actual, initial, we met at so-and-so, like say we bumped into each other at a pub or whatever, and we got chatting, that would be like a story. But because it's kind of through this kind of ethereal thing of the internet, you kind of, I don't know, I've been becoming across it more and more, that I actually struggled to pin down what specific thing it was that actually kind of brought that kind of conversation to the front.
Yeah, and it's I think COVID kind of catalyzed that as well, of like everyone just suddenly finding ideas to assimilate on, and suddenly you're like you feel like you've got these very close friends and connections, but then you realize, oh shit, I've never actually met them in person. But I think you're right. I think I think we actually knew of each other's work quite early, way earlier than COVID, as far as I remember. And it was in this weird moment of Instagram architectural illustration, you know, where I think yourself and me both were in that area quite early on. That moment of when I think Instagram, perhaps let's just say 2017-ish time or 16, where Instagram started to become quite a important resource for architecture students, at least in my view. I mean, I don't think any generations before us, or at least even, you know, I don't even think maybe students in 2014, 2013 were using Instagram and social media in the way they were using it at the start of 2017, let's say. And I think you and me were both people who went into that space quite early to share our drawings, to share our curiosity. Perhaps we both have that same bug of wanting to be extremely curious about our ideas and leverage the possibility of getting feedback from it through social media. Do you see that in the same way? Do you remember kind of getting involved in Instagram quite early?
I think I do. And I think what's interesting about that is that, I think it must have been about 2017, 2018, because it happened almost in line with me starting at the LSA when I moved to London. And it was an interesting thing where I think I'd found the sort of critique that I'd been getting from my work. I mean, it was obviously, you know, quite pseudo-academic, regardless of the school being a new school. And I kind of wanted a different way of just looking at my work, experimenting with my work, sharing it, etc. Because I don't know, for me, I just wanted to kind of put the stuff out there and see what happens. And then there was obviously the kind of the whole resharing culture, which kind of, you know, allowed me to grow a following and that sort of thing. And I just find it was all, for me, it happened quite naturally. And while I look at my page now and it looks very curated. I think that's just a natural curation that I built up over time in a series of little kind of ticks and methods and things like that. But it was always very much just a kind of I think this is interesting, be interesting to see what other people think. But I remember coming up against a lot of, maybe not animosity, but it was one of those things of a lot of people going, well, you know, it's now been designed for Instagram and it's square. The image is square because it has to fit on Instagram. And it was actually a thing of kind of going, I don't think actually, no, it's not that at all. It's just that I just happened to make some square images.
So who gave you that criticism at first?
That was a critique from peers. And that was kind of interesting, an interesting moment, I think, for me to kind of be like, I wonder why that is or why that is. And I think actually that pushed me even more to continue to share, because I think I decided I was very kind of timid about sharing things before. I never shared any work online, and kind of slowly had built up a confidence in doing it. And just sharing ideas, I think, was the most important thing for me, and kind of democratizing the way that the ideas are shared. Because I think the big issue of the way that we learn is that it's all in bubbles in different universities and so on. And then there is an academic kind of weight that it has to meet and has to be set. And it has to pass through these guises, where actually it means that a lot of the stuff that happens in between and a lot of the things that maybe didn't work, but worked in certain ways, never see the light of day. And so while I was posting finished drawings, I was also doing a lot of sketches and things like that. And it was kind of allowing me to get into a method of, you know, not just posting for post's sake, but a matter of thinking and looking and analyzing things.
It's like, you know, think of David Adjaye's visual sketchbook, that, you know, his profile. I often think of it that way, that, you know, well, look, on one side of things, you probably felt that level of criticism and therefore a little bit of a sense of insecurity, or at least trying to deliberate what the intention is of all this. Because, you know, I said this recently, that it feels like we're all on auto drive. We're just getting the stuff out there. And my understanding of it is as that there are some types of people who have the bug of curiosity and experimentation. And they also have this bug of saying, you know, I'm going to be creating things so often and so almost obsessively that there's no other option for me to say, but to put this work out there in some public space, because it's hard to describe. I mean, you could easily equate it. You could easily, a critique of it could be maybe there's a level of insecurity and thinking, at least for myself, perhaps I'd be lying if I didn't say that, part of me was thinking, are people going to like this? Is it good enough? Am I part of this group? But then there's another part of me which is saying, I actually don't want to be part of the group. I want to break away from the group. I want to do my own thing. And in me sharing and putting out my own thoughts into the world, through that I am empowered, and through that I'm able to kind of decide my own fate and not be part of, the system of what's destined to happen for me in this profession. Do you relate to that in any way?
Oh, no, I definitely do. And I think for me as well, I mean, part of the reason that I think I ended up starting to post more when I was studying in London was because the London School of Architecture, their whole kind of overarching idea is that it's about you figuring out what you're about and what your aspirations are and who you are and what your architecture is and so on. But also at the same time, it's not about the lone genius. It's about groupthink, and it's about a collective identity as well beyond that, in terms of practice. And for me, I really latched on to those ideas because I'd come from an undergraduate at the Edinburgh College of Art, where it was your typical 4-year master's, where you have your first year, you build a little writer's retreat. You do your second year, you've learned some actual proper software skills, and you kind of work your way through. But I looked at doing a master's at a variety of different schools, and I could tell you what my work would have looked like at the end of those 2 years. I could have told you to the T how big the drawings would have been, what kind of project it would have been about, etc. And so part of the reason I went to the LSA was because, well, A, they hadn't even got off the ground at that point, and B, they were like, well, we want you to figure it out. We're not going to prescribe to you what you're going to do and how you're going to say it. It's about your ideology. And I think those of us who got the most from it were the people who took the framework and made it the most of it ourselves. And that was, whether it be, building this ideology, posting it and doing all these other things, or it's just like a very, very focused way of looking at one specific thing. All of us found our like niches. And for me, it kind of, again, developed into a lot of the things I'm doing now with my think tank about circularity and circular economy stuff, which, whilst it's very much at the forefront of everyone's minds, it's not actually getting put into practice yet. So it's actually kind of allowed me to jumpstart that form of thinking to then get into the next big questions that I was going to be looking at in my career. But it's a very interesting thing. And I think what's funny for us as well is that I feel like there's been an ebb and flow. Partly, I mean, everyone always cites the changing of the algorithm, the notorious Instagram algorithm, but I think it was a really interesting time, that those kind of 2-3 years where we were all posting things. There was a couple of other people as well who I've since met in various places. But since then, all of us are now grown up, qualified, graduated, etc., working in practice, and the work sort of teeters off a little bit, but also as well, the kind of level of the conversation has changed. And I think that's interesting, just as like almost like a point in time of a moment of what that was. And I don't know if you feel that a little bit as well, but I mean, obviously, I think what's interesting about yourself is that you've managed to continue that kind of rigor of kind of questioning these things, and a lot of us have kind of hidden in practice now.
It's a difficult one, and I relate to a lot of what you said. And for me, it's like I do very much have a strong foot in practice, but I really do have the bug of curiosity, and nothing gives me joy. I don't think I would be able to survive in this profession if I wasn't in a position to question it, if I wasn't in a position to think about the deeper aspects and the wider aspects of the field. I think I would really struggle, because, another question people ask me, and I'm sure they ask you, is like, how the hell do you do all these things? And it's like, before I answer it, how do you answer that question? Because you definitely have got that question, right?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. It varies strongly depending on the time of day, what has been done that day, what the week is looking like. It varies quite dramatically. It's quite interesting because it goes from anything to going, well, I'm just trying to make it seem like I'm kind of managing to keep a hold of it, to I don't really know how I do it. I just don't really, have weekends. That's usually the extreme end of it. And I think it was, again, it's one of those funny things where I think partly because university, it's a 7-day-a-week thing. It's never going to be kind of a 9 to 5 kind of thing. I was just producing around the clock. And so it was actually kind of just an additional thing. And that curiosity kind of just manifested in what I was doing anyway. And it opened up a lot of doors in terms of additional work and various other things, just because of, I think, the moments that we were doing this stuff, people were very actively looking at these things. But yeah, I always find that question funny, because I don't know, I think you probably have the same thing, where you don't actually really think about the enormity of the stuff you do until you get to the end of the week and you go, oh, that would be why I'm a bit tired, kind of thing. And I think it's kind of this, we can laugh about it because, at the moment we're Monday morning, we've had a good Sunday night's sleep, and the week hasn't really begun. But I think what's interesting is that,
speak for yourself, by the way.
Oh gosh, yeah, no, I forget. But yeah, I don't know, it's an interesting thing where, while we can laugh about it, the kind of the dark side of that is that actually we've been conditioned to be able to do that. And we've been conditioned to do that from almost first day of undergraduate. And I very much had that in my undergraduate, that it was expected that you should be spending hundreds of hours a week. And I was working part-time to pay my way through undergraduate and through postgraduate. So I was doing a 30-hour week, and then I was leaving my job at 11 p.m. and going to the studio in my uniform, my work uniform, and working until like 3 or 4, and then going home and then getting up to the studio again. And you kind of question that, and you look back and you go, well, it was kind of a means to an end at the end of the day, and it got me where I got. But at the same time, I should also not be able to do 13, 14-hour days and almost not feel the consequences of it the following day. That's, I think, kind of the other side of the coin.
Yeah, well, you're completely right in the sense that I also don't know how to answer that question a lot of the times. I was asked it in an interview recently, so I had to force myself to answer it. And I think that's when the actual truth emerged for me, which was, for me, everything is connected. There's this podcast, there's the drawing journal, as I like to call it, on Instagram, because for me, it's just a journal. I love the way David Adjaye kind of proposes, kind of names his profile the visual sketchbook, because to me, it's nothing but a place for me to document the chronology of my ideas, because I sense that I'm on a somewhat of a progressive journey to coming to points of realization in my architectural knowledge. And I just want to be able to honestly archive that. And as a result, if there's opportunities to be gained from sharing that with the public, then I'm not going to shy away from that. And I'm not the kind of person to say, oh no, there's no selfish reasons for me to put that online and try to get likes and things. Because of course there is. The doors that have opened from this, and I'm sure for you as well, we have to be honest about that, I think. And I think, one point to make as well about, that's linked to all of this is the competitive nature that you mentioned in architecture school. I think I just did a podcast episode with one of my old friends from uni, and we were talking about how he and myself and another person, we were in this weird kind of competitive triangle. And because of the intense competition we felt with each other, we pushed ourselves to the brink. And it was always a positive thing in my eyes, and even in his eyes, as he explained to me as well, because we didn't have that level of competition where it was like we looked at each other in a bad way, or we were envious of each other's work, or we didn't communicate. It was quite the opposite. We used to go to each other's house. We used to sit. We used to say, "Oh, how the hell did you do that? Like, tell me how you did that drawing." And it was just, that's the side of competition I think people don't talk about, because it's very easy to come out of university and be like, oh shit, we worked till like 3-4 a.m. and blah 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 blah. And it's like, yes, you did, but you didn't have to. And there are ways of being competitive, I feel, and there are ways of being hyper productive that also are quite balanced. What do you think?
Well, it's funny, because I think that's the interesting thing. I think the answer I never give to that question of how you do it all is actually that you learn over time to become a lot more efficient. For me, I can sit down and I can look at certain drawings. I can go, that's going to take me an hour. That's going to take me half an hour. These things, I can get them out quite quickly. I think also the other side of things as well is, now that I'm in practice, the way that my main kind of day job works is that it's very much an understanding that you need to get everything done, obviously. But beyond that, we don't know, matter how you do it, there's just an assumption that as an adult, you will manage your time and you will deliver these things when you deliver them. And so that has allowed me and given me a breadth. They're very keen that all of us are allowed to do additional things and have the time to do that and have the support to do that. And that has allowed me to manage my time as well. But I think it is an efficiency thing. And partly there's obviously the learning curve of kind of getting all the basics down of how you use Rhino, Illustrator, Photoshop, whatever it is. And then there's the kind of methodologies that come with how you practice and what you do and why you do it. But it's quite funny how quickly that starts to really get efficient. And I really do question the kind of, 9 a.m. to 2 a.m. model, because there's no way that anyone could be that productive for that length of time and produce the right quality work. My most productive points are always in the morning. I'm usually alive from about 8 till midday. From midday onwards, it's a bit of a mess. And then from about 6 p.m. till 11, that's it. Like, that's as good as it gets. But even within that, it's about 45 minutes is like when that really deep work comes. That's when those really kind of important things happen. And beyond that, it's kind of by the by. So I think this whole culture that if you've done thousands and thousands of hours means that you'll get a certain output. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's about being very strategic about how you're using your time and why you're using your time, what you're actually trying to get from it. And whether that's just sitting down and going, these are the drawings I need to get done, which ones feasibly I'm going to get done today, and doing that, that's really important. I think the competitiveness is really interesting because, again, I had that in undergrad and postgrad, a really core group of us who all saw eye to eye and how we did it. And I think that's the really important thing about what we do and how you learn in studios, is that you kind of push each other on, but actually it's a very positive thing. It's not a negative thing. And I think, again, in postgrad, I had a similar thing. There was kind of a trio, as it were. And we would all make sure also that, everyone was taking a Saturday or Sunday off and going and doing other things. Like, actually today we're not doing anything. And if we're doing long days, we're not doing it into the night. We're doing it from like 9 till 8 or something like that maximum. And then we should all go home, have dinner, like an actual dinner, and go to bed. And it's interesting. But again, I think there's a reticence to kind of like fight the general way that we've been taught that we have to learn, because, we haven't been taught anything else yet.
It makes me think also about the concept of productivity, and how we're talking about this idea that we recognize, I think, from leading lives and from pursuing things in our field which require the extra work, which require the out of hours work. It's, well, one, what is motivating that? And I think people say, how can we do that? How can we, do the same thing you're doing? It's like, if you're asking that question, I don't think it's for you, because for me, I feel like it's a given that you just automatically have this urge to do something more. And whatever the case, whatever your situation, and I don't think of it as like a privileged thing either, because I'm definitely not, I mean, I have privileges for sure, but we're talking about time and opportunity. I don't have any privileges there. And talking about adapting to the situation and trying to find, I was like you, like in university, I was like, the mornings are the best for me and I'm going to work in the morning. Then you have a kid, and once you have a child, it's like, whenever that kid is out the house or whenever that kid is asleep, I better work hard in that time. It's an amazing thing to like discover yourself, discover your productivity. And I think without pushing yourself, you will not be able to find the moments in which you can flourish. You'll not be able to find your passions. And I really do sense that in you as well, that idea of, you're going to push yourself to the boundaries, you're going to take risks, you're going to put ideas out there. And I think that's where you've reached. And I think obviously we're both still on the beginning of our journeys, but what are you doing at the moment? Because we've talked about the Instagram journey. Obviously, that was through your education. I think you've had a strong foot in the practice, more so than I have. If we're talking about the two worlds we're balancing, of one foot in the profession and one foot in the sort of social media learning or illustrator space, I think I have a little bit, well, I think you have a little bit more pressure on that, on the foot within the practice side. So what has been your kind of struggles or your journey with bringing practice in with all of that as well?
It's an interesting question, because I think also, just as an observation, I think it's quite interesting that you kind of pick up on me having more of a foothold, I suppose, and that directly comes from the London School of Architecture. The whole point of the way that it works is that you're in practice in that first year, and then I was in it through to that you're supposed to drop off at the second year, focus on that last year. But for me, it was just a simple thing of just I needed to be able to live in London, so I continued to work. And I think for me, I really pushed to kind of get into the right kind of practices, because I worried about being shoehorned or kind of typecast into one sort of practice. I worked in a large commercial firm when I was at the school, and that was very beneficial in terms of the way that I could then do my studies, because we had normal hours and things like that. Whereas I think if I'd been in a smaller studio, the expectations are completely different. And again, this is, just the way that I look at it. And it changes from practice to practice, and it's not the same across all small practices. It's not the same across all big practices. But for me, it was very much at the time the big practice worked and it suited me. But beyond that, I was really, really looking to go and work somewhere where I believed in the work that they did. So out of that, I was really fortunate that James Soane, who runs Project Orange, he actually runs the theory part of the school at the time when I was there. And I'd been really trying to find a way to write, because that was actually that was something I struggled at, and I still do. And it's something I really wanted to get better at, because the better I could become about talking about my ideas and putting them down on paper, the more that kind of methodology would evolve. And just by kind of coincidence or luck, I usually always say it's luck. He was actually looking for someone just as I was coming to graduating. And so he asked if I would like to come and join their small team. So he came and did that for a bit, and it was great because I had a lot of opportunities, because he's a writer himself, has published many books, etc. It was really great to kind of learn from him, and also the way that they practice as well. He practices with his husband, and it's this interesting kind of two-pronged approach, where both of them are very much architects, but in very different senses. And it's one of those contrasts where you're like, that just works. Like it's just amazing to kind of be involved in that. And then
what is the contrast they have?
The contrast is kind of it's an interesting one. They both have a different way of attacking the work, and James likes to have a really he likes to get a good kind of overview and kind of build up an idea right at the beginning, whereas his husband Christopher kind of like would just dive straight into it and start sketching and modeling things and trialing things and doing all that sort of stuff. So it's really interesting and then they kind of both take a step back and then go, okay, this is where we then go next, which is really interesting to watch. And it was nice because, again, as at a big commercial practice, I had access to directors, but they were very much doing their own things. And I was kind of only really accessing certain parts of the larger team, whether sitting next door to the directors and really working on these things side by side was really quite an invigorating time. And then from there, an opportunity presented itself at Architecture 00. And I just jumped at that because it was kind of, I think at that point, I was aware that I'd up until that point had an awful lot of experience in the early stages of design, but not in the delivery. Because all the projects I'd worked on up until that point they were cultural, there were music halls, galleries, extensions, all these sort of things, but they'd never kind of got to the later stages because of the scale of just what they were. The very first project I ever worked on in undergraduate, that's not even finished yet. Every time I go up to Edinburgh, I look up and I go, oh, it's almost there, but it's not quite there yet. And so it was kind of the golden opportunity to join 00, get it through those later stages, and then start of next year, they are going to start piling and putting this building in the ground. And it's quite an exciting time. So for me, it was always, I wanted to always kind of go, I've given practice all I have, and I really like try to learn as much as I can. And as you're going through the process of qualifying, I'm doing the same as well. And it's just for me conveniently come at the time where the project's at the point where I really need to know a lot of the things that are kind of coming up. And it feeds perfectly into what I'm doing studying wise. But practice for me, I think, is one of those things where it does ground things. And I think potentially, it can definitely ground things in a negative way, because, the optimism of doing certain things disappears as you realize that just by pure regulation, you can't do that. But I think it actually, if anything, helps the way that I think out of practice as well, because it kind of grounds it a bit as well. There's kind of a give and take, which I think has been really interesting. And I kind of want to continue to develop, which is kind of why I've been pushing to be where I am and what I'm doing in practice.
Most definitely. So I think in the same way that I look at, what I do outside of practice as a facilitative force for my actual practice, it sounds like you see the same thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's the kind of, again, I've been really lucky because of how 00 work, that I have been able to do all these additional things, and they kind of feed everything else. And they recognize that because we're part of a larger collective of studios. So we're also, Studio Weave is also sort of part of what we do. Then they have a think tank that's also part of Dark Matter Labs, which is run by the amazing Indy Johar. So like, there's all these things that are kind of meshed together, like the Wiki. There's also Wiki House with Alistair Parvin and so on, all kind of under one roof. And obviously with COVID and things, it was a bit of a shame because none of us were in the studio. And now, as we're starting to get back into the swing of things, all these different people are now in there, and we're having all these conversations at a variety of different levels. And that's been really interesting. But it's allowed me, because everyone's all doing different things, to also kind of sit down and be like, to not feel guilty that actually I am taking additional time to do these things, or I am kind of committing to these other things in the evenings. It's allowed me that breadth to do that. So going back to the question I think we missed of what I'm doing at the moment, I'm currently teaching, I'm practicing, and then I've also got like a series of kind of small side projects and things that have been going on in the background, one of which I finished this year, which was like a nice opportunity to finally build something, very small scale, that little interior fit out in Norway, which is a really good experience, and came directly from Instagram, came from a relationship that formed from Instagram, which then turned into a teaching thing, which then turned into a project. So it's kind of an interesting way that that's all kind of come about. But the think tank feeds the teaching, and the teaching feeds the practice, and so on. So we're delivering circular economy buildings. We're delivering buildings that have to be, at the end of it, reused, moved, and then built again, and then reused again, and so on. And that then informs the teaching. We're currently running a master studio brief, basically looking at circular economy. How do we do that? How do we retrofit existing infrastructure, save it, and use these principles to enable futures for these structures? And then the think tank, we're doing kind of more high-level research with currently the Port of Rotterdam Authority, looking at how they basically use their large land mass and kind of their weight to kind of change the way that they deal with material processes. So it's a big interwoven mess, but it in some senses it does make sense.
That's insane. It's incredible to see the level of opportunities that emerge for people who really put themselves out there. And, I could ask this very simple question. In fact, I'm going to, is without the Instagram, without the, and again, to label it as just Instagram is in some ways doing a disservice to what the actual nature of the work it involved is, because what it is, in my opinion, is it's the sharing and the documentation of an extremely proactive architectural mind that's documenting the process, that's exploring the boundaries of the profession in a visually appealing way that other people can recognize, that other people can get behind, and then it refines your skill to do that better. And I think you admitted as well as I did that it facilitates your practice. And one way I always say to people that how Instagram has helped me, in some ways more than university helped me, was, often the criticism for university is it doesn't prepare you for practice, which is somewhat a founded criticism. But Instagram weirdly prepares you for practice in a way that I didn't expect, which was, the ability to think of a concept, to think of a project, to think of an idea, and then represent that idea in a visual format that is very quickly done, because time is money in practice.
Yeah.
That is done in an accurate way to the brief, because again, you have to visually sell this idea to people who are looking at it for the instant of a second. And that is, again, a very useful skill to have in this industry. But then on top of that, to also have a level of, a level of understanding of what your position is, because through doing this and through documenting your ideas, you're also pushing yourself to have a position, whether that's socioeconomically, politically, or socially, whatever. If it really does feel to me that without Instagram, without this journey, you would not be opening up the doors that you are in the profession formally right now. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree to a point. And I think whilst it's been really useful, I think the way that it's using now and the way that Facebook is trying to monetize it, etc., is an issue. And that's like a whole other conversation. But I think the way that I communicated with a variety of different people and the opportunities that they've changed and the kind of system of that has morphed. I used to get an awful lot of messages from other students, other peers, etc., asking for advice, various other things about part twos, about work, about this, that, and the next. And that is kind of curtailed, I think, as time has gone on, which is kind of an interesting thing. But no, I think for me, the other part of it is that, I don't come from a family of architects. I don't come from a family of artists, etc. Like I never had a network pre-established and things like that. And I think whilst, the majority of us don't have that, there's the profession itself has got a very strange weighting to it, and how things are done. And for me, I think it was an opportunity to have a different voice and approach getting work and getting opportunities in a different way that didn't require me, having the right connections, having the right people and things like that. It was the networking thing that we all hate so much, kind of as that buzzword, but it allowed me those opportunities where I would have never got them. So I think I totally agree in that sense. But I think it was kind of a necessary thing looking back that, otherwise I don't think anyone would have heard what I was up to, unless I'd really kind of fought to do those writings and things like that. And some of the things that came from that, I would never have imagined it coming from it. I think what's actually the most interesting bit about what we're doing and how things have evolved for us using this medium is the randomness of it and kind of the bizarre obscurity of just like the opportunities that have come. Some things I would have never in a million years have expected to. I think that's what's really kind of interesting about it. And why
what's the weirdest thing you've got from it?
Well, I mean, the project I just finished is really weird. It's a coffee concept store for Porsche cars in Oslo. And it came out of someone messaging me asking if I did graphic tutorials. At the time I was studying and had no time, and I was like, I don't. But, I'd be interested to meet and talk to you, maybe give you some tips, see what you need. And then that actually turned into doing some tutoring with them for a little bit. And then we became friends out of that because actually we realized we had an awful lot in common. And then that friendship kind of ensued for another year or two. And then they had a connection that was like, we want to give you this opportunity to make space in Norway. And then ended up, delivering this little project, which has a very strange brief, but it's very interesting. And we kind of got to test a lot of ideas in that, and very quickly. I mean, it happened basically over the course of a year during COVID, and then now it's done and it's open. You can go and sit and have a coffee while you look at cars. It's very bizarre. It's things like that. Or there's like a kind of an architectural festival called the Archi Fringe, which is run by a collective of architects in Scotland trying to build a new kind of culture around architecture in Scotland. And one of the guys, Andy Summers, was one of my old tutors, and I kind of knew about it through him. And I actually submitted some work to be part of an exhibition and was basically asked to come and kind of present that. And it was, again, a funny thing, kind of exhibiting work along people like Farshid Masavi and Sam Jacob, and kind of going, how did that happen? Being the only student in a kind of a group of professional architects who are far beyond where we are, our current states. The things like that you can't manifest in a kind of just, I want to specifically do that kind of thing. They only come about by chance, I think. So I think it's very interesting, the opportunity that it presents.
Well, this is the fact. And I think I want to speak of things very truthfully and candidly. And as much as I want to not admit that the level of superficiality that Instagram has with it, and the level of kind of instant branding that Instagram has with it, as much as I want to admit that, oh yeah, that is so negative and blah, 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 it is also an incredibly powerful force to get your work out there. And, you know, I want to be honest, and I want to admit it, that, and I love the fact that you've just gone through that and you've explained, and it really is a beautiful thing to just, you know, stand back for a second and think, hold on a second. We just shared drawings on Instagram. And now, as you said, you're exhibiting your work next to some of the leading architects in the world. What's going on there? And then it makes you think, well, wait a minute. The Instagram is not just Instagram. And that's why I wanted to talk about it in a slightly different sense, that it's that in some ways I see it as a metaphor for how architectural education needs to evolve. Because what happens with Instagram, or at least the social media space, is it pushes you to I mean, this is again what, you know, we could get really deep into the whole idea of, you know, the pursuit of individual the individual design idea and the individual essence in architecture compared to the collective. And obviously there's a balance that needs to be hit there. And in some schools, there's way too much emphasis on the individuals, and how that affects you in future life is an interesting question as well. But this aspect of being empowered to share your vision, to share your thinking, to document it, to find what it is, and to have this incredibly useful force. And what is that force? And again, there's downsides with everything. So having access to a tennis stadium sized audience, which is pretty much where we are at the moment, can have negative repercussions. You know, of course it can, as your friends critiqued rightfully in some ways. But at the same time, it's so useful to be able to gauge what the response is, and understand what works and what doesn't work, and understand what is actually effective for people to see and what is valuable for people to absorb, and then refine your process. And in some ways, I think the LSA, as I always say, the LSA seems to be one of the most progressive schools at the moment for architecture. I think the LSA really embodies that spirit. And it's no coincidence for me that you are an LSA graduate, and your work and your Instagram was actually born out of the LSA way of thinking. And it really shines light on me of perhaps where architectural education is going, and opening up the possibility for not just education, but the field to be more flexible, to allow there to be more scope to I guess to say who the architect and what the architect can do. What's your thought on sort of where architectural education is going and where practice is going, based on the experiences you've just had?
I mean, it's a massive question, but I think what's interesting is that there is already this kind of shift away from your pseudo traditional kind of structures. I mean, you know, the ARB are looking to change the part system and make it shorter, make it quicker, because they realize that it very much privileges those that can make it from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 kind of scot-free and not having to worry about cash, etc. And the only reason I was able to get to the LSA was, I mean, you know, partly I went because of an ideological thing and I believed in what they were saying. But also it's the simple thing of just being able to survive in London in an academic setting and do that. That was like a big thing for me as well. But what's interesting now is that the LSA, they now have a new head, in Neil Sashore, and that's going to be, I think, really interesting to see how it evolves as he kind of takes it on and kind of, you know, because it's gone from it being in its infancy, where we joined in the 3rd year. When I had my interview, they hadn't even been accredited yet by the RIBA. That's how new it was at the time. And now it's, you know, that it's 5-6 years on, new head of school, etc. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it continues to develop. And I think, a lot of what I do and what I practice kind of came from a questioning of, I mean, the whole school exists because it questioned what academia is at the moment. And the kind of I think academia is the big thing. This kind of entrenched old school way of looking at architecture, and kind of going, actually, does it need to be as convoluted and as highfalutin as you're saying it is? Why can't it just be a great space that works in a certain way, and you talk about it in a very simple way? Because at the end of the day, it's not about the kind of academic rigor that you need to make this project happen. It's about the people at the end. It's about the end user. It's that sort of thing. And I think with Corona, with this big growth, big shift towards mental health, the way that we work, the hours we do, all these sort of things, I think, and then on top of that, with the global, climate catastrophe, basically, I think, schools are going to have to change, and they're going to have to change very quickly. And luckily, the LSA at the time was very young and fresh and new and small, so they're able to be quite nimble. There are actually universities that are now starting to change the courses and change the way they're doing things. I know for a fact, Sheffield's done away with critiques and things like that, because they are a lot of the time a very negative thing, and they have peer review and things like that, and that is how they do it. They don't have stand-up critiques, and I think it is going to change quite a lot, and I think hopefully for the better, and hopefully it should. I mean, I'm very optimistic that it will widen the scope of who can go to architecture school, because at the moment it's a very sad echo chamber, I think, a lot of the time. But I think, I'm optimistic. I think it's hopefully going in a new way. And I think potentially, a lot of schools are going to be forced to really stand up and say, this is why you're paying your £9,000 or whatever it is to come here. This is the reasons. And it's not going to be because you're going to be doing the same thing they've been teaching for the last 6 years. It's going to be because they've actually, they're trying to change things and make you better as a professional at the end of the day.
Amazing. Fraser, what's your favorite coffee setup? Because I mentioned at the beginning all our similarities, but I forgot to mention that we're probably both massive coffee snobs. Probably you, but me definitely.
It's one of those things where I kind of go, no, I'm not a coffee snob, but no, it's one of those things where it's become part of my daily ritual, and then you kind of, just because you have it at a regular intervals, you always kind of go, and then you just kind of, I don't know, you get a taste for it, don't you? And then you kind of build up your own kind of thing about
what's
why
your setup
you
at home?
like
What's your daily
my
coffee
setup at
setup?
home? I've got my AeroPress. I just have like a little milk frother that I use, which is kind of like the main. It's very straightforward. I'm a coffee snob in some senses, I think, but I'm not the guy with the scales and doing all that sort of thing. So I just grind the beans by hand, pop them in the AeroPress, either black or with some milk, and that's that. But it kind of evolved from, I never used to be a coffee drinker, and then third year of undergraduate, I started having it just because I just decided that was what I was doing. And it was like my treat a day, that I would go and have a 10 o'clock coffee, bring whatever I was reading, and sit and like have that coffee once a day. And it was like my little expense for the day. And it was quite good because I could only handle one coffee at the time, because it was like, I'd never had it really ever at that point. So I'd be buzzing for the rest of the day. And then it's kind of obviously, got to the point where now having like 2 minimum a day, but it kind of evolves. And what about you?
Yeah, no, man. It's for me. I use a V60, so just a drip filter.
Oh yeah.
I do measure, but I think you have to be a bit more precise with the V60. So yeah, that's my setup, just drip filter. And I wish I had the milk frother, but I think the difficulty with a V60 is it's usually best enjoyed black. So yeah. I sometimes just have it black, or I just put a bit of milk in it. But you know what, Fraser, one day we will have that coffee. We've been talking about it for probably a year or two now, that we would eventually have a coffee together.
Yeah. No, I think we do that soon. Let's do it before Christmas.
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out. And also, it's just been a pleasure to talk to you finally, to have a long form conversation with you. I'm sure we'll talk again. I'm sure you'll appear on the podcast again, as I'm sure everything is gonna, progress to massive heights for you in your career. And just thanks again, man. I hope you enjoyed the chat.
Honestly, it's been great, and thanks for having me. I think it's one of these things where, again, I mean, I won't be too critical of it, but there is a pseudo-academic world of architecture podcasts, and it's quite nice to have a change of pace and a change of tone where, I'm more than happy to listen to the different references of Italian architects that you've used to talk about your piazza that isn't really a piazza but has nice tiling. But I think actually, people make architecture, and architecture is for people, and that's kind of the point of what we do. So I think this is actually like a really important thing that you're doing in order to actually get people under, just getting them talking and kind of democratizing what we're doing and why we're doing it.
I appreciate that, Fraser. And just quickly, just tell everyone where they can find your work, because you guys have to check out the Porsche gallery work that Fraser did, and also his Instagram. So yeah, just let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah. So the Instagram is just Fraser_Momo, FRASER_MOMO. Nice and easy. And yeah, the Porsche project's in Oslo. It's by Renzo Piano's Modern Art Gallery on the waterfront in Oslo. So if you want to go and have a look at that, that's always interesting. Or kind of closer, you can go and see what we're up to. The 00. We just finished 2 buildings at the Design District in Greenwich. So go and have a look at those as well if you want.
Incredible. I'll leave a link for all of that in the description. But
great stuff.
Thanks again, Fraser, and I guess I'll see you guys on the next episode.